Good Erev Shabbos, everyone. This week we begin Chumash Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. It begins Vayikra el Moshe, and he called unto Moshe, Vayadaber Hashem Elav, and Hashem spoke to him. Few questions. First of all, what does it mean he called to Moshe? Isn't it sufficient to just say Vayadaber Hashem Moshe? That's what it says throughout all of the 5 books. Hashem spoke to Moshe, Vayadaber Hashem Moshe. All of a sudden here, it's introduced with Vayikra, he called to him. And what exactly does that mean, he called to him? When he called him by name, he sent him a text message. What does it mean, Vayikra el Moshe? And the commentaries also ask, it doesn't tell us who called to Moshe. It should say Vayikra Hashem el Moshe, and God called to Moshe, but it doesn't say that. It says, and he called to Moshe, Vayadaber Hashem, and Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying. How come it doesn't tell us who called to Moshe Rabbeinu? The Bnei Yissaschar says that we find in the book of Deuteronomy, in Chumash Devarim, portion of the Eschana, in which Moshe Rabbeinu is reviewing with Klal Yisrael, with the generation that is about to enter the land of Israel. He is reviewing some of the past events, especially that of standing at Mount Sinai and receiving the Torah. And when Hashem revealed his voice unto us with the 10 Commandments, Klal Yisrael says in chapter 5, verse 22 in Devarim, that they said to Moshe, Im Yosfen anachnu l'shmoyas kol Hashem Elokeinu oid v'masnu. If we continue any further to hear the voice of Hashem our God, we will die. You, Moshe, you approach Hashem, and you receive his teachings and deliver them to us. As they say, the first 2 of the 10 commandments we heard directly from God, and the other 8 we heard through Moshe Rabbeinu. What does it mean that they would die if they hear the voice of Hashem? This voice was such a spiritual embodiment of the divine that it was too much. It was an overload for the circuits, so to say, of the human soul existing within the body. It was too much. We couldn't handle it. It was overwhelming for us, and we would die. So we said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, you who have the ability that you've achieved such purity and sanctity that you have been able to dominate your physical presence. You are a living soul which controls the body. Moshe Rabbeinu, you're like a living angel. And that's how Moshe was able to exist on Sinai 40 days and 40 nights without food, without water. How he was able to exist amongst the angels. Moshe achieved this remarkable level. You, Moshe, you have developed the spiritual antenna and apparatus to receive this voice, this overwhelming spiritual revelation. We can't handle it. This is the voice, the Bnei Yissaschar says, that Hashem was communicating with Moshe. Vayikra el Moshe, he called to Moshe. What does it mean he called? That Moshe heard this voice, and Klal Yisrael did not. Why is that? It could be that it was a miracle, that this voice, as Rashi tells us, the voice of Hashem is powerful, and yet only Moshe Rabbeinu was able to hear it. The rest of us didn't. Maybe that was a miracle. Or, as we find, there are certain frequencies which are beyond a human being's ear to sense. There are those in the animal kingdom that can hear sounds that we don't hear at all. Moshe Rabbeinu was so attuned, so connected to the spiritual, that he was able to perceive and hear that which escaped the ordinary senses of humanity. And therefore, when this spiritual voice came, it was calling to Moshe Rabbeinu and only to Moshe. he was the only human being who could perceive this level of the divine. That's the meaning of he called. And that's why here, when God is about to teach Moshe all the laws of the offerings of the temple service, and the temple service, what is this service? We bring offerings. God doesn't need our offerings, but rather a korban, a sacrifice, is rooted in the word korav. Korav means to be close. A relative is called your korav. We're bound. This temple service is a means and a channel that it binds us unto God. It's not for God, it's for us. It binds us to our Creator. It draws us closer and nearer unto Him. And now Hashem was calling to Moshe Rabbeinu with this great spiritual perception that Moshe exclusively was able to perceive. And he calls to him. That's the meaning of Vayikra el Moshe. Why doesn't it mention Hashem's name? Why doesn't it say God called to Moshe? This great spiritual perception that only Moshe Rabbeinu was able to perceive. Why doesn't it say that God called to him? The answer is because the names of God, we have no description, we have no perception, it defies human imagination. It's beyond a human conception to understand the essence of God. We can only know of God that which He reveals to us that we're able to perceive. So we have various names, Hashem, Elikim, Kel, Rachum, B'chanan, Erechapayim. These are names that give us a description of the magnificence of the divine one, the divine supreme creator. However, this calling, which was beyond human perception, there was no name that we could attach to it. A name is like a title. It gives a title. A title describes something. Lahavdil, a chair is a sitting object. A house is an object, something in which we reside. It tells us something. But this voice of Hashem, this level of spiritual perception, which was beyond human comprehension with the exception of Moshe Rabbeinu, we could attach no name. We have no description. So it just says Vayikra. He called. Who? He who is beyond our perception, even at this level. Now, the essence of God was beyond Moshe's perception too. But nevertheless, Moshe, his prophecy was greater than any prophet who ever lived before him or after him. As the Rambam tells us in the 13 principles of our faith, that Moshe is the father, the greatest of all prophets, and no one can ever contradict, modify, qualify the prophecy of Moshe, because Moshe saw and understood what escapes the rest of humanity. This is Vayikra, he called to Moshe. Now, Rashi tells us that this expression, Hashem's revealing this divine perception to Moshe now, it was an expression of chiba, love, great love. Where do we see that Vayikra calling refers to love? Because the prophet Isaiah tells us, we say it in the Kedusha, the angels call one to the other and they say, Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy is God. What does it mean the angels call to each other? It's an expression of love. They call to each other. How is that an expression of love? The Sukkos David explains that each angel has a certain perception of the divine, and they call to each other to share that perception. Each one is sharing with the other a perception and an insight into the divine. And this way they bond together as one. And this is what Hashem was doing. He called to Moshe. He was revealing to Moshe, giving him a perception of the divine that only Moshe could receive. And with this, Moshe would be able to bond even more closely with his Creator. And that's why it's an expression of love. when something is done to enable us to join and bond together. The level of Moshe Rabbeinu is beyond our imagination. And this is why Moshe was chosen by God to perform the miracles in Egypt, the splitting of the sea, lead us in the desert, receive the Torah, and disseminate it unto Klal Yisrael. And should we ask a question, how is it that Moshe Rabbeinu, flesh and blood, a human being, born from a mother and father, how is it that he should be able to attain such a remarkable, lofty level? There's a Balaturim at the beginning of this Parsha. Vayikra el Moshe. He says, look at the first letters of these three words. Vayikra begins with a Vav. El begins with an Aleph. Moshe with a Mem. Aleph, Mem, Vav. They spell the word Imo, his mother. The Balaturim is sharing that you know how Moshe was fashioned and formed and developed and nurtured that he should grow and achieve and become the Moshe Rabbeinu worthy of perceiving these elements of the divine and receiving the expression of love from God that God should call to him? Who was it that trained and made Moshe to become Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest of the prophets? His mother. When was this? Moshe was put into a basket. He was 3 months old. He was put into a basket. He was found by Pharaoh's daughter, Basya. She took him. He remained in the palace of Pharaoh. Who taught Moshe Rabbeinu? Who instilled within Moshe Rabbeinu the values, the identity, the ethics of what it means to be a Jew and the knowledge of God and our heritage? Moshe refused to nurse for many of the Egyptians. And his sister Miriam suggested to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I bring a Jewish woman to nurse him? She said, yes. Miriam brings none other than Yocheved, Moshe's mother. And Moshe's mother became Moshe's nurse, caring for him day and night, instilling with him these values and the knowledge of God. Moshe took these values, he took this nutrition, this spiritual nutrition from his mother. He digested it and he worked it until he became Moshe Rabbeinu. Purim, a few days away. Look at the remarkable inspiration of all of Klal Yisrael that to this day we celebrate Purim not just as a means of rejoicing, but recognizing the divine presence even when we live in a world in which it seems that there's no godliness whatsoever. Who is it that instilled within Klal Yisrael for all generations the feeling, the knowledge, the love and connection unto God? The Megillah is called Megillas Esther, a woman, a mother of Klal Yisrael. Pesach is coming. A lot of work, a lot of effort. And most of it falls on the shoulders of the mother of the household. But with every effort that we make, and we do so willingly, happily, even though it can be very tedious and time-consuming, but we do so because it's our service to Hashem. Our home is our temple, and this is our service. These are the seeds that are being planted within our children that can help fashion them, that they too will have an identity, an appreciation, and a love of their heritage to be passed down from generation to generation. It was Moshe's mother that enabled him to attain the Vayikra el Moshe, that God should call to him with this remarkable spiritual revelation of the divine that only Moshe could hear because of his mother. It's because of our mothers that we are who we are today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay Jewish. Have a good Shabbos.